Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a little trip back in time. Not to a grand palace or a famous battlefield, but to a place far more intimate and, frankly, a lot more terrifying. We're heading to the American frontier in the late 19th century. We've all seen the paintings and the movies, the cozy log cabin with smoke curling from the chimney. The resilient pioneer family gathered around a fire. It all seems so romantic, so sturdy. Well, tonight, we're going to gently peel back that comforting image and look at the brutal reality it concealed, specifically what it was like to face a winter on the Great Plains. You're not a cowboy or a gunslinger. You're just a regular person, a homesteader, who was promised a dream and found themselves in a nightmare made of wind and snow. You probably wouldn't last a day. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support truly means the world, and while you're at it, let me know in the comments what city you're listening from, and what time it is for you. It's always a quiet thrill for me to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The journey is over. The last lurch of the wagon has ceased, and the only movement now is the tired twitch of a horse's ear and the endless, gentle waving of grass that stretches to every horizon. You step down. Your legs stiff and uncertain after weeks of travel. The ground feels strange, both firm and yielding beneath your worn boots. This is it. You pull a folded piece of paper from your coat pocket. It's a land deed, a claim filed under the Homestead Act of 1862. This isn't just dirt you're standing on, it's a promise. It's 160 acres of a new life, a future you can build with your own two hands. The paper, signed and stamped, feels like a golden ticket. But as you stand there, holding this thin, official document, a strange feeling begins to creep in. The promise feels loud. The reality, however, is silent. You look up from the paper and take in your kingdom. It is vast, empty, and overwhelmingly quiet, save for the wind. The wind is the first thing you truly notice. It's not like the breezes back east, which rustled through trees and were blocked by hills and buildings. Out here, there is nothing to stop it. It's a constant, physical presence. A river of air that flows over the curvature of the earth, coming through the tall, dry grass with a persistent, sighing sound. It tugs at your clothes and whispers in your ears, and it feels less like a welcome and more like a warning. You fish another piece of paper from your pocket, this one more colorful and worn. It's a promotional pamphlet from the railroad company, the very thing that convinced you to come here. It shows a lush, green paradise. A happy, well-fed family stands beside a charming farmhouse, surrounded by fields of impossibly tall corn and an orchard of fruit-laden trees. A clear, sparkling river runs through the property. You look at the pamphlet, then you look up at your 160 acres. The grass is a pale, sun-bleached yellow, not a vibrant green. There are no trees, not a single one, and the nearest water is a muddy, seasonal creek you passed a mile back, already shrinking under the late summer sun. You realize with a sinking feeling that the artists who drew these pamphlets had likely never been here. Some historians have found evidence that railroad promoters would even go so far as to doctor photographs, painting the grass a richer green to sell the fantasy. The land deed in your hand promised you a piece of the country, but this colorful pamphlet promised you a piece of heaven. One of them was a lie, and it wasn't the government's. The deed feels less like a golden ticket now and more like a bounce check. The government offered the land. Yes. The Homestead Act was a revolutionary idea, giving land away to citizens willing to work it. But it was a stark contract. Live here for 5 years. Improve the land. And it's yours. It never promised you'd have the tools, the knowledge, or the sheer luck to survive those 5 years. Historians still debate the true success rate of the homesteaders. Some studies suggest that more than half of all claims were never proven up, meaning the families failed. They packed up what little they had left unvanished. their stories swallowed by the same prairie that swallowed their hopes. You look at the meager collection of belongings in your wagon: a single plow, a few sacks of seed and flour, an axe that will be of little use in this treeless expanse, and a handful of household goods. Is this enough to tame a continent standing under the immense, indifferent blue sky? You feel a profound and unsettling smallness. The sun is warm on your face, but as it begins its slow descent toward the horizon, the endless sigh of the wind seems to carry a different tone, a colder one. It's the first whisper of what's to come. The sun dips lower, painting the endless grass in hues of orange and deep purple. That first primal fear, the one that whispers of predators in the dark, begins to stir. You need shelter. You need walls around you. In the stories and songs from back east, this is the part where you roll up your sleeves, pick up that gleaming axe, and begin felling trees to build a sturdy, romantic log cabin. You glance at the axe sitting in your wagon, then out at the horizon. It's a useless tool here. The only trees are thin, scraggly cottonwoods miles away along the creek beds. Barely enough for a fence post, let alone a house. The railroad pamphlets conveniently forgot to mention that. So what do you build with? You look down at your feet. You build with the one thing you have in infinite supply: the ground itself. You are going to build a house of earth. They call it a sod die, a name that sounds almost charmingly rustic. The reality is anything but. The first step is to get a breaking plow, a specialized, heavy-duty plow designed not just to till the soil, but to slice through the dense, tangled root system of the prairie grass. For generations, this grass has grown, its roots weaving together into a solid mat a few inches thick. This isn't just dirt and grass, it's a natural building material, so tough and fibrous that settlers nicknamed it Nebraska marble. You hitch your weary horse or ox to the plow and begin the grueling work of cutting the sod. The blade bites into the earth, and you wrestle the plow forward, carving out long, uniform ribbons of turf, about a foot wide and 4 to 6 inches thick. The sound is a heavy, tearing groan. This is not gardening. This is surgery on the planet's skin. Once you've carved out these long strips, you take a spade and chop them into manageable blocks, usually about 2 or 3 feet long. Each one is heavy, dense with soil and moisture and a web of roots. You lift one, then another, and another. Your back screams in protest. Your hands, soft from the journey, are quickly blistered under. Now, you become a mason. You lay the first course of sub-blocks directly on the cleared ground, grass side down. Then you stack the next layer on top, staggering the joints just like a bricklayer to give the wall strength. Slowly, painstakingly, the walls of your new home rise from the prairie. They are thick, 2 or 3 feet deep, and they look less like walls and more like neatly stacked sections of the earth itself. You leave a gap for a door frame and, if you were fortunate and wealthy enough to have transported it, a small glass window. Glass was a luxury. Many families simply made do with a greased paper window or a hung blanket, plunging the interior into near permanent twilight. For the roof, you need some kind of support. If you were lucky, you found those cottonwoods by the creek and hauled them back. Or maybe you spent a significant portion of your life savings on a few precious wooden beams at the last railroad town. You lay these across the top of your sod walls. On top of the beams, you might lay down brush or even the canvas cover from your wagon. And then, you put more sod on top of that, grass side up this time. The idea was that the grass on the roof would continue to grow, its roots interlocking to form a living, waterproofish barrier. It was a clever solution, born of desperation. The thick walls provided incredible insulation. They were cool in the brief, hot summer and, more importantly, they would offer a solid defense against the howling winter winds. But your new home comes with roommates. As you lay the final sod blocks on the roof, you don't realize that you're also installing a permanent home for mice, spiders, and the occasional snake. Historians and diaries from the period are full of unsettling little domestic details. Families would talk about being so used to dirt and debris sifting down from the ceiling that they learned to keep their coffee cups and soup bowls covered until the moment they took a sip or a spoonful. It was not uncommon for a snake, seeking warmth from the cooking fire below, to lose its grip and fall right onto the dinner table. When it rained, your roof wouldn't just leak, it would weep. For days after a storm, it would slowly drip muddy water, ensuring that nothing inside ever truly felt dry. You step inside your finished home for the first time. The air is cool and damp, thick with the smell of rich earth, like a freshly dug root cellar. The light from the single small window struggles to push back the deep shadows that cling to the corners. The world outside, with its immense sky and incessant wind, is suddenly gone, replaced by a heavy, muffled silence. And here lies a question that historians and psychologists still ponder. What was the immediate mental effect of living in a sod-die? For some, it may have been a profound comfort. A return to a den-like, room-like security against a hostile world. But for others, was it the beginning of a kind of psychological burial? You came here to own the land, to be a master of your own destiny under an open sky. Yet your first act was to dig into the ground and shelter within it, like a frightened animal. The line between feeling protected and feeling entombed was perilously thin. Standing on the dirt floor of your new home, you feel the weight of the earth in the walls and on the roof, and you wonder if this little cave will be your sanctuary, or your tomb. With your earthen house now standing, a dark and damp monument to your stubbornness, you turn your attention to the next pressing matter: fuel. The air is already getting crisper in the evenings. You know that soon, the cold won't just be a visitor at night, it will be a permanent resident. Back east, the rhythm of autumn was the thud of an axe against wood, the scent of sawdust, and the sight of a neatly stacked wood pile growing day by day. Here, that rhythm is absent. Your axe continues to be a mostly decorative item. The few trees you might find are too valuable for burning. They're reserved for essential repairs. For a door frame, maybe a crude piece of furniture, to burn them would be like burning money. So how will you stay warm? How will you cook the meager food? You have the answer. Once again, lies scattered across the prairie floor. You must become a collector of what the pioneers euphemistically called prairie coal or surface fuel. What it really was manure, specifically dried buffalo manure. For centuries, vast herds of American bison had roamed these plains, leaving behind millions of tons of it, baked hard by the relentless sun. These buffalo chips were a surprisingly effective, if not particularly glamorous, source of fuel. Say your daily routine now includes a new chore. You take a sack or a wheelbarrow and you begin to wander your 160 acres. Eyes fixed on the ground, scanning for these grayish-brown, lightweight discs of dried dung. It's a humbling task. This was not in the promotional pamphlets. There were no smiling families happily gathering manure for their hearth. But you do it because you have no other choice. You gather the chips, piling them high near your sod die. A large, well-tended pile of buffalo chips becomes a symbol of wealth and security, far more meaningful than a full wallet. It represents warmth. It represents cooked meals. It represents survival. The buffalo chip, as a fuel source, had its own unique characteristics. It burned hot and fast, with very little smoke and, thankfully, almost no odor. This was a small mercy. However, its fast-burning nature meant you needed a lot of it. A family could burn through several large sacks in a single winter day. The gathering never really stopped until the ground was covered in snow. Children were often tasked with this job, spending their days roaming farther and farther afield as the supply close to home dwindled. There are countless pioneer accounts of children who got lost while searching for chips, a terrifying prospect in the featureless landscape. But what happens when you've gathered all the buffalo chips within a reasonable distance, or what if you were a later settler, arriving after the great bison herds had been decimated and this natural fuel source was becoming scarce? This is where a little-known and rather desperate innovation comes in. Settlers invented something called a hay twister. It was a simple, often homemade device. You would feed loose prairie hay, which you had in abundance, into this machine. It had a crank that you would turn, and the mechanism would twist the hay into a tight, dense braid, almost like a loaf. These hay logs or hay cuts could then be burned in the stove. The problem was that, like buffalo chips, they burned incredibly quickly. Keeping a stove fed with hay logs was a full-time, relentless job. Someone, usually one of the older children or the mother, had to sit by the stove constantly, feeding these twisted bundles of grass into the fire, one after another, all day long. The house would be filled with the smell of burning grass and a fine, persistent ash that settled on everything. It was a dusty, dreary, and labor-intensive existence. Historians often highlight the physical toll on men during this era, the back-breaking farm work. But the toll on women, confined to the dark sod die, performing the repetitive, endless task of twisting hay just to keep the chill at bay, is a side of the story less often told. And here we find another one of those quiet, ongoing debates among historians. To what extent did the type of fuel shape the domestic experience on the prairie? Some argue that the constant, dirty work of burning chips and hay contributed significantly to the psychological strain of winter, making the home feel less like a refuge and more like a dusty, smoky work camp. Others suggest it was simply another accepted hardship, a testament to pioneer ingenuity and resilience. The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in the middle. It was ingenious, yes, but it was also profoundly draining. As you stand beside your growing pile of buffalo chips, you feel a strange mix of pride and absurdity. You have a home made of dirt and a fuel source made of dung. You are providing for your family, adapting to this new world with a resourcefulness you never knew you possessed. You are a survivor. But as the wind blows another chilly gust across the plains, you can't help but feel a long way from the dream of the yeoman farmer, the noble tiller of the soil you were supposed to become. The sun sets, and you carry an armful of prairie coal into your earthen home. The first fire you light in your small stove casts a flickering, warm glow. For a moment, it feels like victory. But the fire consumes the chips so quickly, and you know you will have to feed it again soon. And again after that. The long, cold night has just begun. The days shorten. The work of preparing for winter becomes your singular focus. A race against a clock you can't see but can feel in the increasingly sharp bite of the morning air. You spend your days harvesting what little you managed to grow in your first season, likely some hardy vegetables like potatoes and squash in a small plot you broke near the sod dye. You work to dig a root cellar, a small underground chamber to store these precious few vegetables, hoping the constant cool of the earth will keep them from rotting. Every potato you place on the shelf is a small victory against the future hunger you know is coming. This time of year on the prairie is dangerously beautiful. It's a period the settlers called Indian summer. The sky is a vast, cloudless, impossible blue. The relentless wind of the summer softens into a gentle, almost caressing breeze. The sun, now lower in the sky, bathes the landscape in a soft, golden light for hours on end. The tall prairie grass, hued by the sun, transforms from a pale yellow to a rich, burnished gold, shimmering and waving in the breeze like a calm, golden ocean. It's warm enough during the day to work in just your shirt sleeves. The nights are cool but not yet truly cold. The world feels peaceful, stable, and forgiving. This is the prairie's great deception. This is its most beautiful lie. You find yourself falling into a comfortable rhythm. You work hard during the day, your body aching with a satisfying weariness. In the evenings, you sit outside your sod dye and watch the sun melt into the horizon, a spectacular display of color that makes you feel, for a moment, that you truly are in a promised land. You might even feel a surge of optimism. Maybe the stories were exaggerated. Maybe winter here isn't the monster everyone claims it is. You look at your sturdy sod house, your pile of fuel, your modest store of food. You think, we can do this. We'll be all right. This feeling of confidence is perhaps the greatest danger you will face. Diaries and letters from this period are filled with descriptions of this glorious autumn weather. People wrote about the beauty, the peace, the sense of hope it inspired. It gave them the energy for one last push of hard work before winter. But this weather has a psychological effect that historians specializing in the environmental history of the West often point to. It fosters a sense of complacency. It makes the warnings you heard back in the last town, the dark tales from other settlers, feel like distant, irrelevant folklore. The immediate, sensory evidence of this perfect weather is far more powerful than any second-hand story. You might even be tempted to take a risk. Maybe you'll put off repairing that loose patch on the sod roof for one more day to get more of the field harvested. Maybe you'll decide the animal shelter is good enough for now, and you can add more reinforcement later. The beautiful weather makes later feel like a safe bet. There's a fascinating but grimly logical theory that some historians propose that the first, most brutal winters for homesteaders were often preceded by the most beautiful autumns. The better the weather in October and early November, the less prepared people were for the violent shift that was about to occur. They were lulled into a false sense of security, like an army that has let its guard down right before a surprise attack. Then there are other, more subtle dangers in this golden season. One of the most terrifying is the prairie fire. The same sun and wind that created the beautiful golden landscape also turned millions of acres of tall grass into a tinderbox. A stray spark from a passing train, a lightning strike miles away, or a mismanaged campfire could unleash a wall of flame that would move faster than a horse could run. Settlers lived in constant fear of it. Your defense was to plow a wide, bare strip of earth around your entire homestead of firebreak. You would plow a ring around your sod dye, your animal shelter, and your haystacks, creating a barrier of black soil that you prayed the fire could not jump. When the terrifying cry of fire went up, or you saw the telltale pillar of smoke on the horizon, the whole family would rush out with wet sacks and blankets to beat back any embers that jumped the fire break. To lose this fight meant losing everything: your home, your food, your animals, your life in a matter of minutes. Your sod dye, being made of earth, might survive, but you would be left with nothing else. But the fires, for all their terror, are a known enemy. You can see them coming. The real enemy, the one you're underestimating, is the winter itself, and this perfect, golden weather is its scout, sent ahead to disarm you with its beauty. You take a deep breath of the warm, dry air. It feels good. It feels like life. You look out over your golden kingdom and feel a sense of ownership. But I mean, you are a homesteader, and this is your home. You fail to notice the subtle signs that a veteran of the plains would see, the way the birds are gathering, the unusual stillness in the air that sometimes precedes a major storm, the specific quality of the light that seems just a little too sharp, too clear. You are still a tourist here. You are enjoying the view, unaware that the stage is being set for a drama in which you are the unwilling and unprepared main character. The change, when it comes, is not gradual. It is an act of violence. One morning, you wake up and something is different. The golden light is gone, replaced by a flat, uniform grey sky that presses down on the landscape, making the world feel small and claustrophobic. The air is unnaturally still, and then you feel it. The wind returns. But this is not the gentle, sighing wind of summer or the caressing breeze of Indian summer. This is a new wind, an alien wind. It comes from the north, a solid, unstoppable force. It doesn't rustle the grass, it flattens it. It doesn't whisper, it shrieks. When this wind hits the side of your sod dye, you feel it as a physical impact, a low, deep shudder that runs through the very earth of the walls. This is the norther, the leading edge of an immense wave of Arctic air rolling down from Canada, with nothing to slow it down or break it up for 1,000 miles. The temperature plummet, not by a few degrees, but by 30, 40, even 50 degrees in a matter of hours. The warmth of yesterday is a forgotten dream. The cold that replaces it is a physical entity, a predator. You rush to get the animals into whatever crude shelter you've managed to build for them. A sod-walled dugout or a lean-to against the side of your house. Their breath plumes in the air. Their eyes wide with a primal fear that you feel echoed in your own gut. You wrestle the heavy wooden door of your sod die shut, the wind fighting you, trying to rip it from your hands. When you finally get it closed and drop the bar in place, the world outside is silent, but not gone. You can still hear it. The wind howls, a high, thin, keening sound that seems to work its way through the very sod of the walls. It finds every tiny crack, every imperfection in your construction, and sends icy little daggers of air into your living space. This is the moment when all your preparations are put to the test. Is your fuel pile big enough? Is your food supply secure? Did you seal the window frame properly? Every shortcut you took, every task you put off during those beautiful, deceptive autumn days, now returns as a potential point of failure. You light a fire in your small stove, feeding it the precious buffalo chips. The stove glows red, a small island of warmth in the encroaching cold, but you can feel the cold radiating from the walls. The insulation of the sod helps, but it's no match for the sheer penetrating power of a prairie cold front. Historians who study the climate of the Great Plains note that this dramatic volatility is one of its defining features. It's not just that it gets cold, it's the speed and ferocity with which the cold arrives. Settlers' diaries are filled with accounts of being caught unprepared by these northers. A farmer might be out in his field, enjoying a mild day, only to be caught in a life-threatening blizzard an hour later. Stories abound of men who left their house to check on livestock in the barn a few hundred yards away and were caught in the sudden, violent grip of a storm, becoming disoriented and freezing to death, sometimes just feet from their own door. These weren't fools. They were simply people unaccustomed to a weather system that operates with the speed and malice of a surprise attack. One of the lesser-known effects of this first cold snap was on the settlers' water supply. Your main source of water is likely a hand-dug well or the nearby creek. With the temperature dropping so rapidly, a thick layer of ice forms almost instantly. Your daily routine of fetching water now becomes a brutal, dangerous chore. You have to take your axe finally, a use for it, and chop a hole through the ice. The wind is trying to tear the axe from your numb hands. Water sloshes and instantly freezes to the bucket, to your mittens, to your clothes. Every trip for water leaves you a little more frozen, a little more drained of precious body heat. And if you're not careful, you could slip on the ice and fall into the freezing water, an almost certain death sentence. The academic debate here centers on a grim question: what was the primary killer in the early days of a prairie winter? Was it the cold itself? Or was it the secondary effects like disorientation and accidents? While freezing to death, hypothermia was common. Some historians argue that the initial shock of the first winter storms was more likely to kill through disorientation. The world you knew yesterday is gone. The familiar landmarks, the gentle roll of the hills, it's all been erased by a grey, featureless, and furiously hostile environment. Your mental map becomes useless. The danger wasn't just physical cold, it was the psychological panic of being lost in a world that had suddenly become alien. Inside your sword die, you huddle closer to the stove with your family. The single small window is now opaque, covered with a thick, beautiful, and terrifying layer of frost fumes. The world outside has vanished. You are in your earthen cave, your tiny fortress. The wind shrieks its rage against your walls. The fire devours your fuel at an alarming rate. You look at the faces of your loved ones, illuminated by the flickering firelight, and you see your own fear reflected in their eyes. The beautiful lie of autumn is over. The truth of winter has arrived, and you realize, with a cold certainty that has nothing to do with the temperature, that this is just the beginning. The real enemy hasn't even shown up yet. The wind has been screaming for a day, maybe two. Time starts to lose its meaning, measured not in hours but in the number of times you've had to feed the stove. The grey, oppressive sky seems to sink lower and lower until it feels like the lid of a box. And then, something changes in the sound of the wind. The high, steady shriek begins to deepen, taking on a lower, guttural roar. A new element has been added to the assault. Snow. But you don't look out your frosted window and see a gentle cascade of delicate snowflakes, like something from a Christmas card. That's not how it works here. The first sign of snow is not something you see, but something you feel. The air inside your sod die, already thick with the smell of earth and burning fuel, seems to grow heavier, denser. The light coming through the greased paper or the small pane of glass dims even further, plunging your world into a perpetual, murky twilight. Then the attack begins. The snow doesn't fall, it drives. It's fired horizontally from the north. A billion tiny, sharp particles of ice propelled by the hurricane force wind. It's less like a snowfall and more like a sandstorm, but with ice. The pioneers had a name for it, a blizzard. The word itself is thought to have German roots, possibly from Blitz or TIGC, meaning lightning light, and that's exactly what it feels like, a sudden, blinding, or loud assault. The sound is immense. It's a constant, deafening roar, a combination of the wind's howl and the abrasive hiss of millions of ice crystals scouring the frozen plains. It's a sound that seems to want to tear the world apart. Any tiny crack in your sod walls becomes a miniature fire hose of fine, powdery snow. You and your family frantically stuff rags, bits of cloth, anything you can find, into these cracks, fighting a losing battle against the storm's intrusion. A fine, glittering dust of snow begins to coat everything inside your home, the blankets, the table, your hair. It melts on contact with any surface that has a trace of warmth, leaving everything damp and chilly. The true terror of the blizzard, however, is the whiteout. This is a phenomenon unique to these vast, open spaces. The sheer volume of snow in the air becomes so dense that it completely diffuses the light. All contrast, all shadow, all sense of distance and direction vanishes. The world is reduced to a single, uniform, luminous white. You can't tell the difference between the ground and the sky. You could be staring at a snowdrift 3 feet in front of you or at the horizon a mile away. There is no way to know. To be caught outside in a whiteout is to be struck blind. Historians and folklore sites have collected countless tragic stories born from this phenomenon. The most famous and heartbreaking is the story of the children's blizzard of 1888, where a sudden, violent storm trapped hundreds of children and their teachers in one-room schoolhouses across the plains. Many who tried to lead their students to the safety of their nearby homes became disoriented in the whiteout and froze to death. Sometimes, as rescuers later discovered, having walked in circles just yards from safety. It's a chilling testament to how quickly the prairie could turn from a place of learning and community into a deadly trap. The debate among meteorologists and historians on this topic is subtle but important. Is a blizzard defined more by the amount of snow or the power of the wind? The official definition today requires sustained winds of at least 35 miles per hour and visibility of less than a quarter mile. But for the settlers, the definition was simpler. A blizzard was when the world disappeared. It was when God wiped the slate clean and you prayed you weren't on it. From the relative safety of your sod die. You are a prisoner. You cannot leave. To open the door would be to invite the storm inside. A churning, violent vortex of snow and ice that would extinguish your fire and bury you in minutes. You are sealed in. All you can do is listen. You listen to the storm trying to claw its way through your earthen walls. You feed the fire. Your movements slow and deliberate, conserving both fuel and energy. Time blurs. Day and night become meaningless concepts. The only clock is the gnawing in your stomach and the ever-dwindling pile of fuel. You try to keep your family's spirits up. You tell stories. You sing songs, but your voice sounds small and thin against the storm's monolithic roar. The children are quiet, their eyes wide. They understand, on a primal level, that the monster from their fairy tales is real, and it is trying to get in. You look at the fine layer of snow accumulating on the floor near the door, a tiny beachhead of the enemy army outside. You feel a profound and terrifying sense of helplessness. You built your house of earth to protect you from the prairie, but now, the prairie is burying you in a sky made of snow. The world you knew is gone, erased by the storm, and as the blizzard rages on, you begin to wonder if it will ever come back. The roaring has been the only reality for what feels like an eternity. Is it the second day, the third, you've lost track? Sleep is fitful, punctuated by the shudder of the wind and the gnawing anxiety that your fuel pile might not be enough. The air inside your sod dye is thick and recycled, heavy with the smell of unwashed bodies, smoke, and fear. The small space feels like it's shrinking, the earthen walls pressing in. The perpetual twilight, which once felt cozy, now feels suffocating. This isn't your sanctuary anymore. It's a cage. Outside, the world is being remade. The blizzard isn't just dumping snow, the ferocious wind is sculpting it. The snow doesn't accumulate in a uniform blanket. It drifts on the leeward side of your house, the side protected from the wind's direct assault. A massive snowdrift begins to fall. It starts at the base of the wall and grows relentlessly. The snow curls over the edge of your low roof, creeping down, sealing the edges. It piles up against your single, precious window, first covering the bottom, then the middle, until finally, the last vestige of dim, grey light from the outside world is extinguished. You are plunged into absolute, total darkness, broken only by the hungry, orange glow of your stove. This is a moment of profound psychological shift. You are now, officially, buried. The sound of the storm changes. The high-pitched shriek is muffled, replaced by a deep, resonant rumbling that you feel in your bones. It's the sound of a beast moving in the earth around you. Your home has become a subterranean cave, a hollow space inside a mountain of snow. The only thing connecting you to the world of the living is the thin column of smoke rising from your stovepipe, which is itself in constant danger of being buried or blocked by the shifting snow. A blocked chimney would be a silent, deadly killer, filling your tiny space with carbon monoxide. This is a new fear to add to the list. You keep the fire going, a small act of defiance against the overwhelming power of the storm. It is your only source of light and warmth, the anchor of your sanity. But another, more mundane enemy begins to make its presence felt: boredom. A crushing, mind-numbing boredom. There is nothing to do. You can't work. You can't see. All you can do is sit, wait, and listen. The same few stories have been told. The same few songs have been sung. Conversations falter and die, needing only the sound of the storm and the crackle of the fire. This is the environment where cabin fever is born. While we use the term loosely today to describe feeling restless, its origins are in this exact experience of extreme confinement and sensory deprivation. A fascinating, if unsettling, bit of pioneer folklore is the belief in prairie madness. It was a recognized condition, particularly among women who were often left alone in these isolated sod dyes for weeks on end while men were away. The combination of the incessant wind, the darkness, the isolation, and the sheer monotony was believed to be enough to unhinge a person's mind. Historians and psychologists still debate the specifics of this phenomenon. Was it a genuine, environmentally induced psychosis, or was it a catch-all term for what we would now recognize as severe depression, anxiety, and the effects of malnutrition? The consensus leans toward the latter. But the folklore speaks to a very real and terrifying experience. The pioneers knew that the winter could attack your mind just as ferociously as it attacked your body. Inside your buried home, the first signs of this mental strain begin to show. Tempers flare over small things: a spilled cup of water, a misplaced tool. Moments of sullen silence stretch into hours. The faces of your family, illuminated only by the firelight, become strange masks. Every small, repetitive noise, the drip of melting snow from the roof. Someone's nervous cough becomes magnified, an unbearable intrusion in the suffocating quiet. You feel a desperate, primal urge to scream, to run, to break free. But there is nowhere to go. You are trapped in your own home, which has transformed into something more akin to a coffin. A sod coffin. You press your ear against the cold, damp earthen wall. You can hear the deep, vibrating hum of the wind moving through the massive snowdrift outside. You are under the snow. You are inside the winter. You are no longer fighting it, you are a part of it. It has swallowed you whole. You try to imagine the world outside, but you can't. The vast, open prairie you stood on just a few days ago seems like a distant, impossible dream. This dark, cramped, stuffy space is the only world that exists now. You lie down on your crude bed, pulling a thin blanket up to your chin. You are not just tired from the lack of sleep, you are tired in your soul. The weight of the snow on your roof feels like the weight of the entire world. And in the flickering darkness of your earthen tomb, a terrifying question lodges itself in your mind. What if the snow never stops? What if no one is coming to dig you out? What if this is it? You close your eyes, not to sleep, but to escape the sight of the same dark walls. And you wait. You wait for the storm to either break, or to break you. And then, one morning, you wake up to a new sensation: silence. The roaring is gone. The deep, vibrating hum of the wind has ceased. The silence is so absolute, so profound, that it feels louder than the storm itself. It's a heavy, weighted silence that presses in on your eardrums. For a moment, you're disoriented. Your body so accustomed to the constant assault of sound that its absence is a shock. The storm is over. A frantic energy fills the small, dark space. It's time to get out. You go to the door, your heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. You lift the bar and push. Nothing. You push harder, putting your shoulder into it. It doesn't budge. It feels like you're trying to push over a mountain. The snowdrift has cemented your door shut, a solid wall of ice and compacted snow. Pellet, cold and sharp, rises in your throat. You are sealed in. You grab the shovel you were wise enough to keep inside. If you hadn't, your situation would be truly hopeless. Your only way out is up the chimney. It's the one part of your house that leads directly to the sky. You are your oldest child. Whoever is smallest must now climb up, pushing the shovel ahead, and begin the terrifying task of digging a narrow tunnel straight up through the snow that has buried your roof. It's slow, suffocating work. Snow collapses, falling down, covering the stove, chilling the precious fire. But you have to do it. Finally, after what feels like an age of frantic, claustrophobic digging, the shovel breaks through. A small shower of snow gives way to a blinding, painful explosion of light. Your eyes, accustomed to the near-total darkness of the sod die, are overwhelmed. You squint, tears streaming down your face. A rush of frigid, clean air cascades down the newly dug shaft, and it's the most wonderful thing you have ever felt. It's the air of the living world. You climb out of the hole in your own roof and stand, blinking and unsteady, on top of your buried house, and you see what the blizzard has done. The world is gone. The familiar rolling hills, the texture of the grass, the dark line of the distant creek bed, all of it has vanished beneath a seamless, brilliant white blanket of snow, but it's not flat. The wind has sculpted the snow into a new landscape of fantastical, alien shapes. Massive drifts, some 10, 15, even 20 feet high, have formed rolling dunes of white. The valleys between them are scoured bare. The frozen, dead grass exposed as if the storm had intentionally swept them clean. The world looks soft, pure, and beautiful, and utterly terrifying. There is no sign of your animal shelter, no sign of your fences, no sign of the path to the well. They are all buried somewhere beneath this new, wide geography. Your first, desperate task is to find your animals. You know roughly where the shelter was. You take a long pole or a fence post and you begin probing the snow, plunging it down again and again, hoping to hit the wooden roof of the lean-to. It's a grim game of hide and seek. The silence is absolute. There are no birds, no coyotes howling. The world is holding its breath. Every living thing is either dead or, like you, just beginning to dig its way out. Eventually, You hit something solid. You dig frantically, the brilliant white snow flying. You uncover the roof of the shelter and clear an entrance. The fear of what you'll find inside is a cold knot in your stomach. These animals are not pets, they are your tractor, your transportation, your source of milk and, in the worst case scenario, your emergency food supply. Their survival is non-negotiable. You open the door to the dark, cramped space. The smell of ammonia and fear hits you, but they are alive, huddled together for warmth, thirsty and hungry, but alive. A weight of relief, so powerful it almost makes your knees buckle, washes over you. This is a recurring theme in Pioneer Diaries, this post-blizzard assessment. The first thing they write about is the silence, then the beauty, then the immediate, frantic search for livestock. There's a fascinating, if grim, piece of animal science that pioneers learned the hard way. Cattle are notoriously bad at surviving blizzards. They tend to turn their backs to the wind and simply drift along with it, walking for miles until they fall into a ravine or die of exhaustion. Horses, on the other hand, will often turn to face the storm, hunker down, and wait it out. Historians still debate the exact reasons for this behavioral difference, but for the settlers, it was a simple, brutal fact: you were more likely to find your horse than your cow after a big storm. You spend the rest of the day digging. You dig a path from your house to the animal shelter. You dig to find your well. You dig to uncover your fuel pile. Your world becomes a series of deep, white-walled canyons connecting the key points of your survival. You are living not on the landscape, but in it. As the sun begins to set, the low-angled light turns the snow from a brilliant white to shades of pink, orange, and pale blue. It is, without a doubt, the most beautiful thing you have ever seen. And yet, you feel no joy, because you understand that this beauty is the aftermath of an attack. It's the beautiful, smiling face of a killer. You are alive. You have survived the first great test. But as you look out over the silent, frozen, alien world, you know the winter has only just begun to show you what it's capable of. The pristine beauty of the post-blizzard world fades quickly, replaced by the grim reality of daily survival in a frozen landscape. Your life is now confined to the narrow, snow-walled trenches you've carved between your sword die, your well, and your animal shelter. The sun, even when it shines, offers no warmth. It's a distant, indifferent light source that glares off the snow with a blinding intensity, forcing you to squint and often causing painful headaches. The pioneers called this snow blindness, a temporary but debilitating condition caused by the sun's reflection. With the immediate crisis of the storm over, a new, quieter, a more persistent anxiety takes its place: the food. You decide it's time to do a proper inventory. You descend into the darkness of your root cellar, a small pit dug into the floor of your sod die, covered with a wooden hatch. The air is cold and still. By the light of a single candle or a precious kerosene lamp, you take stock of your winter provisions. There they are, your life savings, converted into calories: sacks of flour and cornmeal, a barrel of salted pork or beef, bags of dried beans, and your small, pathetic harvest of potatoes, onions, and squash. You count everything. You weigh the sacks. You do the math. A grim calculation of ounces per person, per day, stretched out over the months until a hypothetical spring thaw. There is no room for error. There is no room for generosity. There is certainly no room for pleasure. This is the moment when the monotony of your future diet becomes terrifyingly clear. For the next 4, maybe 5 months, every meal will be some variation of the same few ingredients. Breakfast will be cornmeal mush or fried salt pork. Lunch will be biscuits made from flour and water, perhaps with a little molasses for a treat. Dinner will be a thin stew of beans and potatoes. Day after day, week after week, month after month, the concept of flavor, of variety, of fresh food, becomes a distant, luxurious memory. The reliance on salted meat was a necessity, but it came with its own set of problems. The meat was so heavily salted for preservation that it had to be soaked in water for hours, sometimes days, before it was even remotely edible. And even then, it was tough and intensely salty. This high salt diet, combined with a lack of fresh water, often led to dehydration and other health issues. It was a strange paradox. You were surrounded by a world made of water, but getting enough of it to drink and cook with was a constant, back-breaking chore. One of the most fascinating and tragic aspects of the pioneer diet, which food historians have studied extensively, is the prevalence of nutritional deficiency diseases, particularly scurvy. We tend to associate scurvy with sailors on long sea voyages, but it was rampant on the prairie in winter, caused by a lack of vitamin C. Its symptoms were horrific exhaustion, bleeding gums, loose teeth, and internal hemorrhaging. Settlers had little to no access to fresh fruits or vegetables. Their potatoes were a source of vitamin C, but often their supply was too small or rotted before the winter was over. This has led to a historical debate. Did pioneers understand the cause of scurvy? The evidence is mixed. While the formal science wasn't common knowledge, many had a folk understanding that something in fresh plants was necessary for health. Diaries sometimes mention a desperate craving for something sour or green. In the spring, one of the first things families would do is forage for wild onions and other edible greens, consuming them with a ravenous, medicinal urgency. As you finish your accounting in the dim, cold light of the root cellar, the numbers on your piece of paper stare back at you. They are not just numbers. They are a countdown. The bottom of the flour barrel is a deadline. The last potato is a finish line. You realize that your battle with winter is not just against the storms and the cold. It's a silent, mathematical war waged in your own pantry. You secure the hatch to the root cellar, the sound echoing in the quiet sawed die. You go to prepare the evening meal. You open the sack of cornmeal. A small puff of dusty flour fills the air. You measure it out carefully. Your movements precise. You add water, which you painstakingly hold from the frozen well. You stir the mush over the fire. This is not cooking. This is the administration of fuel. You are fueling the bodies of your family, giving them just enough energy to survive another day, another night. You sit down to eat in the flickering firelight. No one speaks much. The food is bland, tasteless. You chew and swallow, your mind already calculating the meals for tomorrow, for next week, for next month. The fear of the blizzard was a loud, roaring fear. This new fear is quiet. It's the silent, grinding fear of a slow, creeping starvation. It's the fear of the empty shelf and the hollow stomach. And unlike the blizzard, this fear doesn't end when the sun comes up. It sits with you at every meal. It whispers to you in the long, cold, hungry nights. And there's nothing you can do but eat your meager portion and hope that your math was right. Your war against the winter is fought on two fronts. The first is the obvious one, the world outside your door, the snow and the wind. The second, more insidious front is right here, inside your own home. You are in a constant, losing battle against the cold itself, which has infiltrated your fortress and become a permanent, unwelcome guest. Your sword die, which seemed so promising with its thick, insulating walls, has a fundamental weakness: water. The ground it's built from is saturated with moisture. As the intense cold of the prairie winter penetrates the earth, the walls of your house begin to freeze solid. They don't just feel cold to the touch, they radiate a deep, penetrating chill that seems to suck the warmth right out of your body. A thick layer of frost forms on the interior walls, a beautiful, crystalline coating of ice that glitters in the firelight. It looks magical, like something from a fairy tale, but if you axe against it with your arm, it burns like a hot iron, and your sleeve comes away wet and freezing. The children, in a moment of naive curiosity, might try to lick the frost, only to have their tongue stick fast to the wall. A moment of childhood panic and pain. You learn very quickly not to lean against the walls, not to store anything important touching them. The walls are no longer part of your home, they are the enemy's territory. The greatest source of misery, however, is the dampness. It is everywhere. The warmth from your stove, your bodies, and your breath rises and hits the cold ceiling. Condensation forms and drips down relentlessly. Drip, drip, drip. It's a slow, maddening water torture. It drips into your food as you cook. It drips onto your face as you sleep. Nothing is ever truly dry. Your blankets are perpetually damp. Your clothes feel clammy and heavy. And when you put them on in the morning, they steal your body heat with a shocking intimacy. The smell of mildew becomes a permanent part of the air you breathe, mingling with the scent of smoke and earth. This constant dampness is more than just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. It creates a perfect breeding ground for sickness. A simple cold can quickly turn into pneumonia in an environment where your lungs are always inhaling cold, damp, moldy air. And of course, it's hell on your morale. The simple human comfort of being warm and dry is a luxury you cannot afford. Pioneer diaries are filled with complaints about this specific kind of misery. They talk about their bedding freezing to the wall at night. They describe waking up with their hair frozen to the ground if they slept on a mattress on the floor. One of the most interesting and poignant details that historians of domestic life have uncovered is the problem of bread. For a woman trying to bake bread, a staple of their diet, the cold was a constant foe. The yeast needed warmth to activate and make the dough rise. Women would go to extraordinary lengths to find a warm spot for their dough, often wrapping it in blankets and placing it as close to the stove as possible. Some even described taking the cold, heavy lump of dough to bed with them, using their own body heat to try and coax it to life. The success or failure of the daily bread was a small but powerful symbol of their struggle against the oppressive cold. The academic question here is one of environmental determinism. How much did the physical structure of the sod dye directly contribute to the settlers' physical and mental health decline during the winter, while it's impossible to draw a direct causal line? Some scholars argue it was the primary factor. The combination of darkness, dampness, cold, and poor air quality created a uniquely unhealthy environment. Others argue that malnutrition was the more significant factor, weakening the body's ability to cope with the environmental stress. Most likely, it was a vicious cycle, with each factor exacerbating the others. You spend your days huddled in a small survival space immediately around the stove. This is the only part of your home that is truly habitable. The stove, small, cast iron box, is the sun of your tiny solar system. You cook on it. You dry your wet mittens over it. You huddle around it for warmth. The rest of the single room fades into a cold, dark, and hostile territory. You feel a strange sense of agoraphobia, not of open spaces, but of the corners of your own home. To move just a few feet away from the stove is to be instantly, bitingly cold. The fire is a demanding tyrant. It must be fed constantly. The buffalo chips or hay logs burn so quickly, you find yourself rationing them, letting the fire die down to a dull glow to conserve fuel, enduring the creeping cold until you can't stand it anymore and are forced to add another precious handful. Every piece of fuel you burn feels like spending a gold coin. At night, the family huddles together for warmth, a pile of bodies under a collection of damp blankets and animal hides. You lie awake, listening to the drip of water from the ceiling and feeling the deep, profound cold radiating from the earth just inches below and around you. It feels like you are being held in the cold, wet mouth of the prairie itself. You came here to conquer the land, to make it your own, but as you lie shivering in your house made of frozen mud, you realize the land is conquering you, slowly, patiently, from the inside out. The world has shrunk to the size of your single, dimly lit room. The silence that followed the blizzard was a relief at first, but now it has curdled into something else. It has become an active presence, a heavy blanket of quiet that smothers all other senses. In this profound silence, a single sound reigns supreme: the wind. Even on a clear, calm day, the wind is never truly gone. It is the breath of the prairie. You can hear it moving over the vast, frozen landscape. A low, mournful sigh. But when it picks up, it becomes a voice. It moans around the corners of your sod die. It whistles and shrieks through the stovepipe. It's a lonely, desolate sound, a symphony of emptiness. It's the sound of absolute, soul-crushing isolation. You know, intellectually, that there are other people out there. You remember the last town you passed through, weeks or months ago. You remember seeing the smoke from another homesteader's chimney, miles away on the horizon, back in the autumn. But no, in this frozen, white world, they might as well be on another planet. You have no way of contacting them, no mail, no telephone, no roads. You are an island in a sea of snow. This is the psychological core of the prairie winter experience. It's not just the physical hardship, it's the profound and total loneliness. Back east, even in a rural community, there was a sense of connection. You could hear a church bell. You might see a neighbor's wagon on the road. There was a web of human sound and activity. Here, there is nothing. Only you, your family, and the voice of the wind. The wind begins to play tricks on you. In its endless, varied howling, you start to hear things. A phantom voice calling your name. The cry of a child. The distant, imagined sound of a ringing bell. You know it's not real. But, in the sensory-deprived environment of the sod die, your brain, starved for stimulus, starts to create its own. This is a common phenomenon reported in extreme isolation, from polar explorers to solitary sailors. The pioneers were experiencing it in their own homes. Diaries from the period are filled with an almost obsessive focus on the wind. They personify it, giving it a personality, a malevolent intelligence. They describe it as a monster, a ghost, a white devil. It wasn't just a weather phenomenon, it was the audible manifestation of their loneliness and fear. This has led some historians to explore the oral history of the frontier, the study of what the past sounded like. They argue that to truly understand the mental state of a homesteader in winter, you have to understand the psychological impact of listening to nothing but the wind for months on end. One of the most poignant and little-known details of this isolation was the desperate hunger for news. In the autumn, you might have received a letter or a newspaper that was weeks or months old. Now, you read it again and again. You read the advertisements. You read the shipping news from cities you've never seen. You read every single word until you have it memorized. The paper becomes brittle and soft from handling. It's a tangible link to a larger human world that you are no longer a part of. The information is useless, the events it describes are long past, but the words are a comfort. They are a reminder that other people, other places still exist. The debate among social historians on this topic is about the role of the family unit. Did the intense, forced proximity of the family alleviate the loneliness? Or did it in some ways make it worse? On one hand, having your loved ones with you was a powerful defense against despair. You were not truly alone. But on the other hand, the complete lack of social variety, the absence of any face that wasn't your spouse's or your child's, could be its own kind of prison. The pressure to maintain a cheerful, functional family dynamic in such a stressful, confined environment was immense. The loneliness wasn't for people in general, but for other people. A new face, a new voice, a new story. You find yourself staring out your single, frosted window for hours, hoping to see something, anything, a wolf, a bird. But there is nothing but the endless, undulating white. The silence and the wind work together as a form of psychological erosion, slowly wearing down your sense of self, your connection to the world, your hope. You try to fight back. You invent chores. You clean the already clean rifle. You reorganize the tool shelf for the 10th time. You tell your children stories, not just for them, but for the sound of your own voice. To prove you can still make sounds other than a shiver. You try to remember the words to songs, but they drift away, stolen by the wind. At night, you lie in the darkness and listen. The wind is always there, a constant companion. It whispers of your foolishness for coming here. It sings of the vast, empty spaces between you and the rest of humanity. It howls with a triumphant, wild loneliness that mirrors the desolation in your own heart. You came here seeking independence, a life of your own making. You have found it. You are so independent, so separate, that you have almost ceased to exist. And the wind is the only one who knows you're still here. Your own survival feels precarious enough, but you are not just responsible for yourself and your family. You are also the sole guardian of your animals, and their survival is a full-time, brutal job that cannot be ignored, no matter how cold or tired you are. Every day begins and ends with the animals. They are your living, breathing, and extremely vulnerable investment in the future. The journey to the animal shelter is a daily battle. You pull on your stiff, frozen boots, wrap yourself in every layer you own, and step out of the relative warmth of the sod dye into the trench of snow you've dug. The cold hits you like a physical blow. The air is so frigid it hurts to breathe, searing your lungs. Your breath freezes instantly on your beard or scarf. You trudge through the narrow canyon, the snow walls towering over your head, towards the lean-to dugout where your animals are huddled. Their shelter is even more miserable than your own. It's likely a crude structure. Perhaps 3 sod walls built against the side of your house with a roof of brush and more sod. It's dark, cramped, and thick with the smell of ammonia. The animals are milk cow. A pair of oxen or horses are the most valuable things you own. The cow provides precious milk, a vital source of fat and calories. The oxen or horses are your engine. Without them, you cannot plow the fields when spring comes. If they die, your dream of a farm dies with them. First, water. The well is frozen solid. Every morning, you must take your axe and spend 20 minutes of violent, exhausting work just to chop a hole through a foot or more of ice. You haul the bucket of freezing water back to the shelter, your hands numb and aching, the water slushing and freezing instantly to your clothes. The animals drink greedily. You have to do this multiple times a day. It is non-negotiable. Then, food. Their food is a stack of prairie hay you spent the late summer and autumn cutting and piling. It's now buried under a mountain of snow. You have to dig it out, one frozen, matted pitchfork full at a time. The hay is low in nutrients, barely enough to keep them alive. You ration it as carefully as you ration your own flour. You watch the animals for signs of weakness, for the dullness in their eyes that signals the beginning of the end. Losing an animal is not just an emotional loss, it's a catastrophic economic blow. This daily struggle highlights a fascinating corner of agricultural history: the introduction of new forage crops. The native prairie hay was tough and not particularly nutritious. Agricultural scientists and progressive farmers in the late 19th century were experimenting with planting hardier, richer crops like alfalfa and clover that could survive the climate and better sustain livestock through the winter. But for you, a first-year homesteader, such innovations are a distant dream. You are stuck with what the land gives you for free, and it's barely enough. One of the most grim and visceral accounts from pioneer life involves a practice known as lifting. When a cow or ox became too weak from starvation and cold to stand on its own, it would lie down in the snow and refuse to get up, a sure sign it was about to die. To prevent this, the entire family would go out to the animal, and together, they would try to get it back on its feet. They would put their shoulders under its belly and heave, trying to lift the half-done animal, their feet slipping in the frozen manure. Sometimes they would build a sling to try and winch it upright. It was a desperate, back-breaking effort to literally keep their future from collapsing. The image of a family straining together in the biting wind to lift a dying cow is a powerful, heartbreaking symbol of the prairie winter. The academic debate here is on the economic viability of the 160-acre homestead itself. Was the model fundamentally flawed? Many agricultural historians argue that 160 acres was simply not enough land on the semi-arid Great Plains to support a family and its livestock through traditional farming methods. It was a parcel size inherited from the wetter, more fertile lands of the east, and it was ill-suited to the new environment. This led to the enlarged Homestead Act in the 20th century, which increased the allotment. But for you, in this moment, that debate is meaningless. You have to make this work. You finish your chores, your body aching and your hands raw. You give your ox a pat on the neck. A small gesture of affection for your partner in this struggle as you turn to leave the shelter. The animal lets out a low, mournful sound. In the deep quiet of the frozen world, it sounds like a complaint, a question. Why did you bring me here? It's a question you've been asking yourself. You trudge back through the snow trench to your sod die. You've kept your animals alive for one more day, but the effort has cost you. You are colder, more tired, and you've used up more of your own precious energy reserves. It's a cruel equation. To keep them alive, you have to spend a piece of your own life. And as you look at your dwindling hay pile, you know this gamble gets more desperate with each passing day. The days are a flat, grey line of repetition. Wait, feed the fire, tend the animals, eat, stare at the walls, tend the animals again, eat, sleep. The physical world has shrunk to the size of a few hundred square yards. Your mental world is in danger of shrinking with it. In this void of stimulus, you turn to the only form of escape you have, the printed word. Somewhere in your meager belongings is a book. Maybe it's the family Bible. Its pages worn thin and soft from generations of hands. Maybe it's a copy of Shakespeare, or a sentimental novel, or a dry almanac full of planting charts and tidal tables. It doesn't matter what it is. It is your only window out of this frozen prison. In the evenings, after the last meal of tasteless mush has been eaten, the family gathers around the wick. Flickering light of a tallow candle or a single kerosene lamp. Fuel for the lamp is as precious as fuel for the stove, so this is a rationed luxury. One person, usually the most literate, is given the honor of reading aloud. Their voices are small, human sound in the vast, windy silence. You read the same pages you read the night before, and the night before that. You are no longer reading for plot or for new information. You are reading for the simple, comforting cadence of the sentences. You are reading to hear words that were not spoken by you or your family. Words that come from the outside world, from another time and place. The story is as familiar as your own name. You know every character, every turn of phrase. The book has ceased to be a story and has become a ritual, a prayer against the encroaching emptiness. This intense relationship with a very limited supply of text is something literacy historians find fascinating. In an age where we are drowning in information, it's hard to imagine a world where a single book could be the focus of a family's entire intellectual and emotional life for months on end. The pioneers developed a form of deep, repetitive reading that we no longer practice. They didn't just read the words, they inhabited them. They would discuss the characters as if they were real people, neighbors they hadn't seen in a while. They would debate their motivations, their choices. The fictional world of the book became a vital extension of their own tiny, real world. Sometimes, it wasn't a book. It was an old newspaper you'd been saving for months. You read every single article aloud, the political news from Washington, the society pages from Chicago, the advertisements for soap and farm equipment. It's all hopelessly out of date. But it doesn't matter. It's a tapestry of human activity. It's proof that a world of commerce, politics, and parties still exists somewhere beyond your snow-buried horizon. The Montgomery Ward catalogue, if you were lucky enough to have one, was a particularly rich source of fantasy. You would look at the drawings of new dresses, of complex machinery, of furniture and toys. It was a catalogue of a life you weren't living, a dream book of impossible luxuries. The academic question that arises from this is about the nature of literacy on the frontier. The standard narrative is that the frontier was a place of rough, uneducated people. However, the Homestead Act itself required literacy to file a claim, and many settlers, particularly those from New England or Northern Europe, came from cultures with high literacy rates. Some historians argue that literacy was, in fact, a crucial survival tool, not for its practical applications, but for its psychological ones. The ability to read, to escape into a text, may have been as important to surviving the winter as a good axe or a warm coat. It was a tool for preserving one's sanity. But even this refuge has its limits. After the 100th reading, the words can start to feel hollow, the escape less effective, the letters on the page blur, the story feels like a lie. The contrast between the rich, complex world in the book and the stark, empty reality of your sword die becomes too painful. The book, once a comfort, is now a reminder of everything you've lost, everything you don't have. You close the book and place it carefully on the crude shelf. The silence rushes back in, filled only by the sound of the wind. You look at the faces of your family, their expressions blank in the dim light. The shared journey into the world of the book is over, and you are all back in your earthen cell. The brief escape has only made the return to reality more jarring. You feel a profound intellectual hunger, a starvation of the mind that is just as real as the gnawing in your stomach. You crave a new idea, a new image, a new thought. You try to remember poems you learned as a child, to reconstruct stories you once heard. You are trying to mine the depleted resources of your own memory. But the winter is long, and your mind feels as barren as the frozen prairie outside. The book was your window, but now, when you look through it, all you can see is your own reflection, trapped and staring back. The relentless of your sword die have been laying a siege on your bodies for months. Now, the walls have been breached. It starts with a cough. A small, dry, tickling cough from one of the children. In your old life, back east, a cough was a nuisance. Here, in this isolated, frozen world, it is a sound of pure terror. There is no doctor. The nearest one is likely 100 miles away, an impossible distance across the landscape with no road. Even if you could reach him, you have no money to pay him. You have no medicine, save for perhaps a bottle of whiskey or some folk remedies of questionable effectiveness that you brought with you. You're completely, terrifyingly on your own. The cough worsens. It becomes deep, ragged, and wet. The child's face becomes flushed with fever. Their breathing grows shallow and rapid. You know, with a cold, sinking dread, what this is. It's pneumonia. The dreaded winter fever that was one of the biggest killers on the frontier. The combination of malnutrition, stress, and the constant inhalation of cold, damp, moldy air has weakened the child's defenses, allowing the infection to take hold. Your home, the sword die you built to protect your family, has become a hospital ward and a prison. Your only tools are love and desperation. You boil water on the stove, creating steam in a futile attempt to ease the child's breathing. You give them sips of precious, clean water. You hold their hand, your own heart pounding with a helpless, frantic rhythm. You try to coax them to eat a little bit of broth, but they have no appetite. You press a damp cloth to their forehead, trying to fight a fever that is raging like a prairie fire. The entire family's focus narrows to the sick bed. The daily chores tending the animals, fetching water are done with a grim, mechanical efficiency. All conversation ceases. The only sounds in the sword die are the child's labored breaths, the mother's quiet weeping, and the relentless moan of the wind outside, which seems to be mocking your powerlessness. This helplessness in the face of illness is a central theme in the medical history of the West. While we often focus on dramatic injuries like gunshot wounds, the historical record is clear far more people died from disease than from violence. Common illnesses that are easily treatable today: influenza, diphtheria, dysentery, and pneumonia were death sentences. The lack of sanitation, poor nutrition, and complete absence of professional medical care created a perfect storm for epidemics. One of the most interesting and debated topics among medical historians is the role of folk medicine versus the so-called heroic medicine of the period. The folk remedies brought by settlers, often passed down through generations, were a mix of herbal knowledge and pure superstition. Some, like using willow bark, a source of soil ICN, the active ingredient in aspirin for fever, had a real basis in science. Others were useless or even harmful. Heroic medicine, practiced by the few doctors who were available, often involved aggressive treatments like bloodletting and purging, which could do more harm than good. The grim debate is whether you were better off with your grandmother's poultice or a doctor's lancet. For you, the homesteader, this is a purely academic question. You have neither. You sit by the child's side through the long, dark nights. You watch the rise and fall of their chest. You listen to every breath, praying it's not their last. The fire in the stove seems to burn with a malevolent intelligence, consuming your precious fuel as you fight for your child's life. The line between life and death feels terrifyingly thin, a fragile thread that could snap at any moment. You feel a profound, soul-crushing guilt. Did you do this? Did you bring your family here to this godforsaken place to die? You think of your old home, of the community, the neighbors who would have come with soup and advice, the doctor you could have called. You traded that world for this one, for 160 acres of dirt and a dream that has turned into a nightmare. The weight of that choice is unbearable. Then, one morning, after a long night of crisis, something changes. The fever breaks. The child's breathing, while still weak, is a little easier. They open their eyes and ask for a drink of water. Their voice a tiny, raspy whisper. It is the most beautiful sound you have ever heard. A wave of exhaustion and relief so profound it feels like a physical blow washes over you. The immediate danger has passed. The child will live. But the ordeal has left its mark on everyone. The sick child is weak, a pale shadow of their former self. Your meager food supplies have been further depleted by the needs of the invalid. And a new, colder fear has taken root in your heart. You have been lucky this time, but the winter is not over. There are still months of cold and privation to endure, and you know, with a terrible certainty, that sickness will come knocking again. You have won this battle, but the war is far from over. The crisis of the illness has passed, but it has left behind a permanent scar on the family's psyche. The fragility of your existence has been laid bare. You are acutely aware that the next disaster is always just one cough, one slip on the ice, one bad decision away. This heightened sense of vulnerability makes the isolation feel even more acute. You find yourself gazing out the frosted window, not just with boredom, but with a desperate, aching longing for connection. You begin to think about your neighbors. You know they're out there, somewhere. When you first arrived in the autumn, you saw the distant plume of smoke from another sod die. Maybe 5 miles to the west, you met another family at the land office in town, and you know they settled a few miles to the south. In the geography of the East, 5 miles is a short walk, a quick buggy ride. Here, in the dead of winter, it is the distance to the moon. The snow has erased all paths, all landmarks. The bitter cold makes any extended time outdoors a life-threatening risk. And so, your neighbors remain a purely theoretical concept. They are an obstruction, a comforting thought that there are other souls enduring the same struggle. But they also know practical comfort. You can't borrow a cup of flour. You can't ask for help lifting a sick cow. You can't share a moment of conversation. They are invisible, and you are invisible to them. This creates a strange paradox that social historians of the frontier find endlessly fascinating. The West was settled by communities, but experienced in profound isolation. People moved in groups, often from the same town or with the same ethnic background, and settled near each other. They were supposed to form a community, but the brutal reality of the environment, particularly the winter, shattered that intention. The prairie forced each family unit to turn inward, to become a self-contained, sealed-off survival pod. The community was a dream for the summer. In the winter, it was every family for itself. One of the most poignant testaments to this isolation is the phenomenon of the prairie funeral. If someone died during the winter, a proper burial was impossible. The ground was frozen solid, as hard as iron. You couldn't dig a grave. So the body of the loved one would be wrapped in a shroud and placed in a small outbuilding, or sometimes even just in a snowbank a short distance from the house, to remain there, frozen, until the spring thaw. The family would have to live for months with the knowledge that their dead lay just outside, unburied. Then, in the spring, when the ground had softened, a messenger would be sent to the other homesteads. The neighbors would finally gather, weeks or months after the death, to help dig the grave and say the long-delayed words of parting. It's a heartbreaking image, a funeral for memory. The historical debate here revolves around the concept of neighboral incense on the frontier, the popular myth, often celebrated in fiction and film, is one of unwavering communal support. If a family was in trouble, the neighbors would drop everything and come running. There is plenty of evidence that this was true, particularly during shared tasks like harvests or barn raisings. However, some revisionist historians argue that this myth whitewashes a harsher reality. They point to diaries and records that show a more complex picture, one of competition for scarce resources, of disputes over land and water, and of a grim practicality that sometimes meant you couldn't afford to help a neighbor because it would jeopardize your own family's survival. The truth is likely that both were true. The capacity for immense generosity and the necessity of brutal self-interest existed side by side. You find yourself wondering about your invisible neighbors. Are they okay? Do they have enough food? Did sickness visit their home? To you came the horizon, a vast, empty expanse of white, looking for a sign, a flicker of smoke, anything. And one day, you see it, a thin, almost imperceptible grey line rising into the pale blue sky, miles to the west. It's the smoke from their chimney. A wave of emotion, so intense it surprises you, washes over you. It's relief. It's joy. It's a profound sense of connection. They're alive. They're still there. They are burning their fuel, fighting their own battle, just like you. You are not the last person on earth. You point it out to your family, and everyone rushes to the window to gaze at this small, miraculous sign of life. For the rest of the day, you feel a little lighter, a little more hopeful. The smoke is a fragile thread connecting your two lonely islands. You don't know their names. You don't know their story. But you know that over there, in another dark, earthen room, another family is clustered around a fire, looking out at the same empty landscape. And maybe, just maybe, they are looking in your direction, searching for your smoke, and feeling the same flicker of hope you feel right now. For a brief moment, the crushing loneliness recedes. You are still isolated, but you are not entirely alone. And in the dead of a prairie winter, that small distinction is everything. Just when you think you've grown accustomed to the rhythm of this frozen world, the prairie reminds you that it still has new ways to terrify you. Another storm rolls in. But this one is different from the first blizzard. The temperature is a little warmer, just a few degrees, which means the snow that falls is heavier, wetter, and the wind is even more ferocious. This isn't just a storm, it's a sculpture. The wind picks up the heavy, wet snow and uses it like plaster. It meshes it against the walls of your sod die, against the animal shelter, against the hay pile. It finds every crack and crevice and seals them with a thick, icy paste. But its true artistry is saved for the drifts. Because the snow is heavier, it doesn't just swirl and settle, it accumulates with an incredible, terrifying speed. You watch from your small window as the world outside is consumed. The snow doesn't just fall from the sky, it seems to be growing from the ground, rising up in great, curving waves. The trenches you dug, your lifelines to the well in the barn, fill up and vanish in a matter of hours. Your entire homestead, your house, your shelter, your very existence is being buried under a new mountain range of white. The sound is different this time, too. It's not the sharp, hissing scour of the first blizzard. It's a deep, heavy, muffled drawl. The sound of immense weight being moved. You can feel the pressure of the snow piling up against the north wall of your sod die. The structure, which you built with your own hands, groans under the strain. You lie awake at night, listening to the pops and creaks of the roof beams, praying they will hold. The fear is no longer of being frozen, but of being crushed. This phenomenon of massive, architecturally significant snow drifts is a key feature of the plains winter that is often misunderstood. We think of snow depth as a uniform measurement, but on the prairie, it was all about the drift. A storm that officially dropped only a foot of snow could easily create drifts that were 30 or 40 feet high. These drifts were not soft and fluffy. The pressure of the wind and the weight of the snow compacted them until they were as hard as concrete. There are incredible historical photographs of the aftermath of these storms, showing men standing on top of drifts that completely cover a two-story house, with only the chimney poking out. They show entire trains, massive steam locomotives, completely buried, invisible beneath a mountain of white. One of the more obscure but fascinating dangers created by these super drifts was the threat to livestock from snow tunnels. Animals, particularly cattle, seeking shelter from the wind, would huddle against a large haystack or the side of a building. As the drift formed around them, they could become in tune. The warmth of their bodies would melt the snow immediately around them, creating a small pocket of air, but as they consumed the oxygen, they would suffocate. In the spring thaw, farmers would discover these grim tableaux: perfectly preserved cattle, frozen in a standing position, inside a hollowed-out cave in a snowdrift. The academic debate here among environmental historians is about the long-term ecological impact of these massive snows. While they were a source of terror and hardship for the settlers, they were also a vital source of moisture for the semi-arid plains. The slow melt of these enormous drifts in the spring would saturate the soil, replenishing the water table and setting the stage for the explosive growth of prairie grass. So, the very thing that threatened the settlers' existence in the winter was the same thing that made their survival possible in the summer. It's a classic example of the boom and bust environmental cycle of the Great Plains. After a few days, the storm passes, leaving behind another silent, white world. But this one is different. The scale is monumental. You have to dig your way out again. But this time it's not a matter of clearing a path. It's a major excavation project. You dig a tunnel from your door, not a trench. You emerge into a landscape of towering white cliffs and deep, shadowed canyons. Your own homestead looks like an ancient ruin, half buried by a glacier. You have to relocate all your essential points to well, to heap all by memory, and begin the back-breaking work of tunneling to them. The work is slow and dangerous. The compacted snow is heavy, and the tunnels are in constant danger of collapse. You are like an ant, building a colony beneath the surface of a hostile world. You stand on top of what you think is your roof and look out at the horizon. The world is a masterpiece of minimalist art, all sweeping curves and stark white shapes. There is a terrifying grandeur to it. You feel an overwhelming sense of your own insignificance. You came here to impose your will on the land, to mark it with your fences and your plow. The land has responded by simply erasing you. It has buried your efforts under a weight so immense, so absolute, that it feels like a personal rebuke. You are a tiny, warm-blooded creature in a world that wants to be cold and still, and as you pick up your shovel to continue your desperate, mole-like tunneling, you understand that you are not the master here. You are a trespass. And the prairie is just patiently waiting for you to run out of energy, so it can cover you up for good. The walls are closing in, not the physical solid walls of your home, but the walls of your own mind. The second great blizzard has passed, leaving you even more deeply buried, more profoundly isolated. The brief flicker of connection you felt seeing your neighbor's smoke is gone. The sky now perpetually blank. The monotony has reached a new, excruciating level. Your world is a tiny, dark, foul-smelling cave, and you have been in it for too long. This is the point where cabin fever graduates from a colloquialism to a clinical condition. Your brain, starved of new sights, new sounds, and new information, begins to turn on itself. It's an act of self-defense. a desperate attempt to create stimulus where none exists. And it is terrifying. It starts subtly. You become intensely, irrationally irritated by the small habits of your family members. The way your spouse chews their food. The way your child hums the same tune over and over. These tiny, once unnoticed details become magnified into unbearable acts of aggression. You have to clench your fists and bite your tongue to keep from screaming. The air in the sod die becomes thick with unspoken resentments. Then, your perceptions begin to warp. The familiar shadows cast by the firelight seem to move when you're not looking directly at them. You hear whispers in the sound of the wind that are no longer just imagined sounds, but feel chillingly real. You have moments of profound disorientation, where you forget where you are, or even who you are, for a terrifying second. Your sense of time, already fractured, completely dissolves. The past, present, and future blend into a single, looping moment of misery. You begin to have vivid, powerful dreams that feel more real than your waking life. You dream of the sun on your face, of green grass, of the taste of fresh fruit. You wake up with the ghost of these sensations on your skin and tongue, and the return to the cold, dark reality of the sod die is a physical blow. The dreams are not a comfort, they are a torture. They are a reminder of a world you are no longer part of. This descent into psychological distress is a well-documented but poorly understood aspect of pioneer life. The term prairie madness, which we touched on earlier, was often used to describe the state you are now entering. Historians and literary scholars have long debated its representation in fiction. Most famously in all are Lvaag's novel Giants in the Earth, which depicts a pioneer woman's gradual descent into a madness brought on by the isolation and emptiness of the prairie. The central question in this debate is, was this a gendered phenomenon? The term was most often applied to women. Was this because they were genuinely more susceptible due to their confinement? Or was it a reflection of a patriarchal society's inability to understand or validate female psychological suffering? Dismissing it instead as hysteria or madness, the current consensus leans heavily toward the latter, suggesting that men experienced the same psychological trauma but were either better at concealing it, or their symptoms like violence or alcoholism were interpreted differently. One of the lesser known, and more extreme, manifestations of this mental breakdown was a form of obsessive-compulsive behavior. Diaries describe people engaging in strange, repetitive, meaningless tasks for hours on end. A woman might scrub the same spot on the floor until the wood was worn thin. A man might spend an entire day dismantling or smelling a piece of machinery for no reason. These were not acts of productivity, they were attempts to impose order on a chaotic internal world, to find a single, controllable task in a life that was utterly out of control. You find yourself doing it, too. You count the cracks in the ceiling. You pace the tiny floor, a 3-step journey from one wall to the other, over and over again. You stare into the flames of the stove, your mind completely blank, for what feels like hours. You are retreating from the world, from your family, into a small, sealed-off part of your own consciousness. The greatest fear is that you will lose control completely. You look at the axe in the corner, the rifle on the wall. You know that you would never harm your family, but the fact that the thought, a fleeting, intrusive, horrifying image, can even flicker across your mind is enough to terrify you. You are not yourself anymore. You are a stranger in your own body, a prisoner in your own skull. You try to hold on. You focus on the small, concrete tasks of survival. Feed the fire, fetch the water, ration the food. These simple, physical actions are an anchor in a swirling sea of unreality. You are fighting a war on two fronts, one against the winter outside, and one against the winter within. And it is no longer clear which one is more likely to destroy you. The snow can bury your house, but cabin fever can bury your soul. The calendar on the wall, a cheap piece of paper from a grain company, tells you it should be getting close to spring, but the calendar is a liar. The world outside is still a frozen, white wasteland. The wind still howls with the same bitter cold, and a new, more tangible fear has begun to eclipse all the others. The food is running out. It's a slow, quiet, creeping terror. It begins with a new level of rationing. The already meager portions get smaller. You start skipping meals, telling your children you're not hungry, so they can have a little more. Hunger becomes a permanent resident in your home, a constant, dull ache in your belly. It makes you weak, irritable, and unable to think clearly. The gnawing emptiness in your stomach is a constant, physical reminder of your desperate situation. You go to the flour barrel. You scrape the sides with the scoop, the sound loud and hollow in the quiet room. You can see the bottom. The potatoes in the root cellar are gone. The salted meat is down to a few last, tough, stringy pieces. You are now living on a diet of thin cornmeal mush and biscuits, made with the last dregs of your flour. Your body is starting to fail. You feel dizzy when you stand up too quickly. Your muscles ache with a profound weakness. This is the point where settlers had to make horrific choices. Do you slaughter one of your precious oxen for meat? To do so would be to sacrifice your ability to farm in the spring. It's like burning your house down to stay warm for one night. It's a trade of the future for the present. The decision to kill a work animal was the ultimate act of desperation, a sign that a homesteader had all but given up on the dream. With the food gone, you turn to the last, most desperate resource, the landscape itself. But the landscape is as barren as your pantry. There is nothing to hunt. The deer and antelope have migrated away. The rabbits and prairie chickens are hunkered down, impossible to find. Some settlers resorted to trapping mice and other small rodents in their sod dyes, a grim source of a few extra calories. This period of late winter starvation is often called the starving time by historians, a term borrowed from the early colonial experience at Jamestown. It was a predictable, annual crisis for many first and second-year homesteaders. Their initial supplies were meant to last one winter, but they often underestimated the length and severity of that winter. This has led to a historical debate about government and railroad policy, where the homesteaders deliberately misled. Critics argue that the promotional materials were criminally optimistic, luring people into a situation they were not equipped for. Defenders of the policy argue that the government was simply offering an opportunity, and the responsibility for preparation and survival rested with the individual. They contend that the story of the West is one of self-reliance, and that includes the risk of failure. One of the most obscure and heartbreaking details of the starving time was the use of forage. This didn't mean foraging for berries or mushrooms. It meant eating things that were not meant to be eaten. Settlers would boil the leather from their boots or harnesses, trying to extract some small amount of protein from the tough hide, creating a foul-smelling, gelatinous broth. They would grind up the bones of animals that had died during the winter to make a gritty, unpalatable bone meal to mix with their last bit of flour. These were not meals, they were desperate acts of chemistry, attempts to find a few last calories in a world that had none to offer. You look at your own worn leather boots. You think about it. The thought itself is a sign of how far you have fallen. Your children are thin and pale, their eyes large in their shrunken faces. They don't complain. They are too weak to complain. They just huddle by the fire, their movements slow and listless. The crushing weight of your responsibility as a parent, as a provider, is a physical pain. You have failed them. You have reached the absolute bottom. The physical battle against the cold and storms was hard. But this is worse. This is a quiet, internal decay. Your body is consuming itself. Your hope, which you have guarded so fiercely for months, is finally beginning to die. You lie down on your bed, too weak and demoralized to even feed the fire. You close your eyes. You have fought as hard as you can. You have endured the storms, the sickness, the loneliness. But you can't fight an empty barrel. You can't eat snow. You can't feed your children with promises. You have given everything you have, and it wasn't enough. The prairie has won. You simply wait for the end. As you lie in a state of near surrender, a new sound penetrates the thick walls of your sod die and the thicker fog of your despair. It's a sound you haven't heard in months. a sound that belongs to the living world. It's a howl, a long, lonely, hungry howl, and then it is answered by another, and another, until the night is filled with a chorus of wild, desperate voices. The prairie wolves, or coyotes as they were more often, are on the move. Throughout the winter, they too have been struggling, hunkered down, and starving, but now their own desperation drives them out into the open. They are drawn to the scent of your dwindling livestock and your own human settlement, a faint beacon of potential food in a barren wasteland. The howling is not just a sound, it's a message. It says, "We are here, we are hungry, and we are getting closer." In the first few months, the sound of a distant wolf might have been a romantic, wild thrill. Now, it is the sound of a direct competitor, a rival for the scarce resources of this frozen world. You get up from your bed, your weakness momentarily forgotten, and go to the door, listening. The howling isn't on the distant horizon anymore. It's close, frighteningly close. You can hear the individual voices, the yips and barks that punctuate the long, mournful howls. They are circling. Your livestock, already weak from hunger and cold, are terrified. You can hear them shifting nervously in their shelter, their soft grunts and snorts filled with panic. Your milk cow and your oxen are not just your future to a pack of starving wolves. They are a feast. Protecting them becomes your final, most primal duty. You take down the rifle from the wall. Your hands tremble, not just from cold and weakness, but from a surge of adrenaline. You chuck the ammunition. You only have a few rounds left. Each one is precious. You can't afford to waste a single shot. This conflict between settlers and predators is a cornerstone of Western mythology, often romanticized as a battle between civilization and wilderness. The reality was far more grim and pragmatic. It wasn't about heroism, it was about pest control. Wolves and coyotes were a direct threat to a homesteader's economic survival. Bounties were placed on them, and organized hunts were common. The near extermination of the wolf from the Great Plains was not an accidental byproduct of settlement. It was a deliberate and calculated policy. One of the interesting, and still debated, questions among wildlife historians is the actual danger that wolves posed to humans themselves. While folklore and sensational stories were full of tales of wolves attacking and killing people, documented, verified cases are incredibly rare. The consensus is that healthy, wild wolves have a natural fear of humans and will almost always avoid direct confrontation. However, a starving, desperate pack in the dead of winter is a different animal. And for a settler, alone and weakened, the psychological fear was just as real as any physical threat. The line between a cautious animal and dangerous one was not a risk you were willing to take. You spend the night as a sentry. You don't dare light a lamp for fear of wasting fuel, so use it in the dark. Rifle across your lap, listening. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of the wind, sounds like an approaching predator. The howling rises and falls, sometimes seeming to be right outside your door, sometimes moving farther away. It's a war of nerves. They are testing you, waiting for a moment of weakness. The presence of the wolves adds a new layer of psychological terror to your existence. Before, you were fighting an impersonal enemy, the cold, the snow, starvation. Now, you are fighting a living, breathing intelligence, an enemy that is also hungry, also desperate. You feel a strange, unwelcome kinship with them. You are both locked in the same brutal struggle for survival, pitted against each other by the cruelty of the season. As the first, pale, grey light of dawn begins to filter into the sky, the howling subsides. The wolves retreat with the darkness, melting back into the white landscape. You open the door cautiously and look out. The snow is crisscrossed with tracks, a clear and chilling record of the night's events. They were here. They were close. They were inspecting your fortress. You stumble to the animal shelter, your heart in your throat. You open the door and find your animals, terrified and exhausted, but unharmed. They survived the night. You survived the night. But you know this is not the end. The wolves will be back. The hunger that drives them is as relentless as the winter wind. They know you are here. They know you are weak. And they, like the prairie itself, are patient. They can wait. Just when you are certain that this frozen, colorless hell is your permanent reality, the world decides to play a trick on you. A cruel, beautiful, and devastating trick. You wake up one morning and the wind has changed. It's no longer coming from the north, a blade of Arctic ice. It's coming from the south, and it feels different. It's not warm. Not yet, but it lacks the vicious bite of the winter wind. It's a soft, gentle breath. The Chinook has arrived. The Chinook is a famous and dramatic weather phenomenon in the western plains. The warm, dry wind that descends from the mountains and can raise temperatures by an incredible amount in a very short time to the local Native American tribes. It was known as the Snow Eater, and for good reason. The effect is magical, almost biblical. The temperature soars from 10 degrees below zero to 40 degrees above in a single day. For the first time in months, you can feel the sun on your face and perceive a genuine warmth in it. The thick frost on your window melts, and you can see the outside world clearly for the first time. And the sound, the world, which has been locked in silence, comes alive with a new, miraculous sound, the sound of dripping water. It drips from the eaves of your sod dye. It drips from the branches of the single, scraggly tree by the creek. Drip, drip, drip. It is the most hopeful, beautiful music you have ever heard. It's the sound of the world waking up. A frantic, joyous energy overtakes you. This is it. It's over. Spring is here. You throw open the door to your sod dye and take a deep breath of the soft, damp air. The snow, which had been a series of hard, icy cliffs, is visibly shrinking. The tops of your fence posts emerge. The roof of the animal shelter appears. The world is returning from its white grave. The snowpack, which was feet deep, melts with astonishing speed, turning the pristine white landscape into a slushy, grey mess. Small rivers of meltwater begin to carve channels in the snow. You and your family work with a renewed vigor you thought you'd lost forever. You shovel away the slushy, heavy snow from your door. You check on the animals, who are standing in a field of mud and melting snow, looking as bewildered and relieved as you are. The hope is so powerful, so intoxicating, that it's almost painful. You have survived. You have won. You start to make plans. You'll start plowing as soon as the ground is clear. You'll plant the seed. The dream, which had been frozen solid for months, thaws and comes back to life. This false spring, or fool's spring as it was sometimes called, is a well-documented part of the plains climate. Climatologists can explain it, the science of air pressure and mountain ranges, but for the settlers, it felt like a miracle, and that's what made it so dangerous. Their diaries from these periods are filled with ecstatic, hopeful entries. The winter is broke. They write, thank God, spring has come at last. But the veteran plainsman knows better. The old-timers, the ones who have seen this before, do not celebrate. They watch the sky. They know the prairie is a trickster, and the cruelest trick is the one it's about to play. After 2 or 3 days of this glorious, night-affirming thaw, the wind shifts again. Without warning, it swings back to the north. The gentle, caressing breeze is replaced by the old, familiar, razor-sharp Arctic blast. The temperature plummets, even faster than it rose. All that water, the slush, the puddles, the rivers of meltwater instantly freezes solid. The entire world, which was just beginning to soften and come alive, is encased in a thick, seamless sheet of clear, pearled ice. The effect is devastating. The ground becomes a skating rink, impossible to walk on. Your animals, already weak, can't get any traction and are at risk of falling and breaking a leg. A death sentence. The half-melted snow becomes a crust of ice so hard you can't break through it. Any small plants or grasses that were beginning to emerge are now sealed under a layer of ice, suffocated. This is not snow. This is not winter as you knew it. This is a new, crystalline form of hell. The historical debate here is whether the fool's spring was ultimately more damaging than a steady, continuous winter. Some agricultural historians argue that this freeze-through-freeze cycle was far more destructive to the land, to livestock, and to human morale than a consistently cold winter would have been. The brief taste of hope made the return to winter's grip feel infinitely more brutal. It was a psychological blow from which it was hard to recover. You stand at your door, looking out at a world that is now made of glass. The dripping has stopped. The silence has returned, but it's a different, harder silence. The hope that had filled you just yesterday has curdled into a bitter, profound despair. You have been cheated. You were shown the promised land, only to have it snatched away. This feels personal. It feels malicious. The winter wasn't just trying to kill you, it was toying with you first. And as you retreat back into the cold, damp darkness of your sod die, you feel a weariness that is deeper than any you have felt before. The physical winter is hard, but the winter of the heart, the one that comes from a hope that is raised and then dashed, is the hardest of all. The ice age that followed the false spring holds the world in a glassy, unforgiving grip for what feels like another lifetime. The despair is a cold, heavy stone in your gut. You've given up hope. You are no longer waiting for spring. You are simply waiting. You operate on a kind of grim autopilot, performing the bare minimum tasks required to keep the spark of life from extinguishing completely. Your mind is quiet, too tired for the tricks of cabin fever, too numb for the sharp pangs of hunger. And then, one afternoon, as you are sitting listlessly by the stove, you hear a sound you haven't heard in so long that it takes your brain a moment to identify it. It's not the wind. It's not the howl of a wolf. It's not the groan of the house. It's a soft, gentle, rhythmic sound. Drip, drip, drip. You don't move. You don't dare to hope. You assume it's a trick of your mind. A ghost of the false spring come back to haunt you. But the sound continues. It's steady, persistent, real. It's the sound of water falling from the roof. Slowly, cautiously, you get up and go to the window. You scrape away a tiny patch of the grime and frost. The world outside is still white, but the light is different. It's softer, gentler. The sun is higher in the sky, and as you watch, another drop of water forms on the edge of the sod roof and falls. A tiny, glistening jewel that disappears into the snow below. This time, there is no frantic, joyous celebration. You've been burned by that before. This time, the feeling is one of quiet, cautious, fragile reverence. You don't say anything to your family. You just stand there, watching the drips, counting them like prayers. Each one is a small victory against the tyranny of the ice. Each one is a tiny chisel, chipping away at the foundation of winter. Over the next few days, the signs accumulate, small and settled. You notice that the snow near the south-facing wall of your sod is beginning to pull away, leaving a tiny, bare patch of muddy ground. It's the first patch of bare earth you have seen in months. It's probably a mess of mud and dead grass, but to you, it is the most beautiful garden you have ever seen. Then, one day, you see a bird, a single, small, dark bird, perched on the roof of the animal shelter. It's some thin, tentative thread of sound in the vast silence. It's a declaration. The world of the living is returning. The most definitive sign comes from the animals. Your milk cow, which has been producing only a trickle of thin, watery milk, begins to give a little more. Your horse seems to have a new energy, a new alertness in its eyes. Animals are tuned to the seasons in a way that humans have forgotten. They can feel the change in the length of the days, the angle of the sun, Their bodies know that the great starvation is ending. Their revival is a more honest and reliable signal than any calendar. This gradual, hesitant reawakening of the prairie is a subject of great interest to ecologists and natural historians. They study the specific sequence of events: which plants emerge first, which animals return, how the ecosystem pulls itself back from the brink of death each year. One of the more fascinating details is the role of the snow itself. The deep snowpack that was the source of so much misery is also a fantastic insulator, protecting the roots of the prairie grasses from the killing frost. Underneath that blanket of death, the potential for life was being preserved all along. The debate among historians is how much of this folk ecology the settlers themselves understood. Did they see the snow as purely an enemy? Or did they have a more nuanced understanding of its dual role as both a threat and a promise? The evidence in their diaries is ambiguous, suggesting a relationship based more on fear than on understanding. You begin to spend more time outside, not because you have to, but because you want to. You stand in the strengthening sun, feeling its warmth seep into your bones, a warmth you thought you would never feel again. You breathe in the air, which now smells not of ice, but of damp earth, of life, of possibility. The world is being reborn, and you feel as if you are being reborn with it. You have not been defeated. You are still here. You are gaunt, weak, and scarred by the ordeal, but you are alive. You have looked into the white, frozen face of the prairie winter, and you have not blinked. A new feeling begins to replace the despair. It's not the giddy joy of the fall spring, but something deeper, quieter, and more powerful. It's a grim, hard-won pride. You hear the dripping of the water. You see the patch of bare earth. You watch the bird on the roof, and for the first time in a very long time, you allow yourself to believe. The long, dark night is finally, truly, ending. The dawn is coming. The star, when it truly takes hold, is a swift and messy affair. The world dissolves. The monumental drifts, those hard-packed mountains of snow that defined your landscape for months, begin to rot from within. They shrink and sag, the water pouring out of them in steady streams. The brilliant white is replaced by a dirty, pock-marked grey. The prairie is letting go of its icy grip, and the process is not elegant. As the snow recedes, the land beneath it is revealed, and this is when you must face the final accounting of winter. This is when you tally your losses. The receding snow is like a tide going out, and it leaves behind the wreckage of the storm. First, you find the things you lost. A shovel that was left outside and buried in the first blizzard. A bucket that was torn from your grasp by the wind. These small, mundane objects feel like artifacts from another civilization, reminders of a life before the great white silence. Then, you find the damage. The roof of the animal shelter has partially collapsed under the weight of the snow. A section of your crude fence has been snapped and splintered. These are tasks for the spring, a new list of labors to be added to the endless work of farming. Your heart sinks a little, but you are too relieved to be truly discouraged. These are problems of the living, and you are grateful to have them. The most grim discoveries are the biological ones. You find the frozen carcasses of wild animals that didn't make it: a deer, its body gaunt, half eaten by the wolves whose tracks are now revealed in the mud. You find smaller creatures, rabbits and birds, that were caught in the open. The prairie in spring is a vast, open-air graveyard. It's a stark, unsentimental lesson in natural selection. The greatest fear, of course, is what you will find among your own native stock. You do a careful count. You are lucky. Your cow and your horse have survived. Though they are painfully thin, their ribs showing starkly beneath their winter coats. You have won your desperate gamble. But, as you survey your small herd, you realize with a pang of sadness that the cow, which was pregnant in the fall, has lost her calf. It's a small, sad loss, but a loss nonetheless. One less mouth to feed, perhaps, but also one less animal to sell or raise. And then there is the final, most dreadful account in your neighbors. Now that travel is becoming thinkable, a profound and heavy question hangs in the air. Who else made it you look to the west? To the spot on the horizon where you saw the smoke from that other sod die. For days, you scan the horizon, looking for a sign of life, but you see nothing. The tradition on the prairie, as travel became possible, was for one person to make the rounds, to check on the surrounding homesteads. It was a solemn, anxious duty. One day, you see a figure on the horizon, a man on a horse, moving slowly through the melting snow and mud. He is the first human being you have seen outside your own family in almost half a year. He is making the rounds. He rides up to your sod die, his face weathered and grim. You greet each other, not with joyous shouts, but with a quiet, knowing nod. There is no need for small talk. You both know why he is here. You ask him about the family to the west, the ones whose smoke you saw. The man just shakes his head slowly. The fever, he says, the whole family. He tells you about another family, to the south, who lost all their livestock in the second blizzard and had to pack up and leave, defeated, heading back east. This grim exchange of news was a fundamental ritual of the prairie spring. It's how the community, shattered by the winter, began to reform itself. It's how the map of who was left was redrawn. Historians who study the demographics of homesteading call this the Great Filter. The winter was the filter. It sifted the population, removing the unlucky, the unprepared, and the unwell. The debate among these historians is about the primary cause of failure. Was it economic loss of livestock, environmental or particularly bad storm, or biological disease? The records suggest it was an inseparable combination of all three. A family weakened by malnutrition was more susceptible to disease, and a family that lost its livestock had no way to recover economically. It was a chain reaction of disaster. A lesser known, but poignant, detail of this spring accounting was the orphan claim. If an entire family perished, their homestead claim was considered abandoned. Often, a neighbor would take on the grim task of burying the bodies and then file a claim on their land. It sounds callous, but it was a pragmatic part of the system. The land, according to the Homestead Act, was meant to be worked. It's a stark reminder that, in this world, even in death, there were economic consequences. The man on the horse shares what news he has, and then he rides on, a lonely apostle of loss and survival, heading to the next isolated homestead. You are left with the silence and the knowledge. You are survivors, but you are survivors in a land of ghosts. The family you never met, the one you felt a connection to through a thin line of smoke, is gone. Their struggle is over. Yours continues, and the knowledge of their fate adds a new, somber weight to your own survival. You didn't just get lucky. You took someone else's place. You survived the cold, the snow, and the starvation. You would be forgiven for thinking the worst is over. But the prairie has one last test for you. A final, miserable barrier between the end of winter and the true beginning of spring. Before the land turns green, it must first turn to mud. The sheer volume of water released by the melting of the immense snowpack is staggering. The frozen ground, still solid just a few inches below the surface, cannot absorb it. So the water sits on top, mixing with the rich prairie soil, creating a sea of thick, black, sticky, inescapable mud. The world, which was a solid landscape of white, now becomes a liquid one of brown. Travel is not just difficult, it is impossible. The crude dirt roads and trails dissolve. A wagon will sink up to its axles in minutes. A horse will struggle and pull and quickly become exhausted, its legs coated in heavy, clinging mud. Even walking is a treacherous, exhausting ordeal. With every step, your boots are grabbed by the mud, which tries to suck them right off your feet. After just a few yards, each boot is encased in a heavy ball of soil, and you feel like you're walking with lead weights strapped to your ankles. Your sod die, which endured the winter, now faces a new threat. The ground around it is a swamp. The water seeps back into the sod walls from which it came, making them damp and heavy. The root, made of the same earth, becomes saturated and begins to leak constantly. Not with clean water, but with a steady drip of muddy, brown tears. The inside of your home is as damp and miserable as it was in the dead of winter, but now it smells of mud and decay instead of ice. This period was known to the settlers as the mud season, and in many ways, it was as isolating as the deepest part of winter. You were no longer trapped by snow, but by mire. You could see the town on the horizon, but you could not get there. You lay stuck or trapped in a small, muddy corral, standing hock deep in muck. The risk of refot and other diseases is immense. The misery is profound. You have survived the sublime, terrifying power of the blizzard, only to be imprisoned by something as mundane and undignified as mud. Agricultural historians find this mud season particularly interesting because it posed a direct and critical threat to the success of a homestead. The spring planting season is a narrow window of opportunity. You have to get your seeds in the ground at just the right time to take advantage of the spring rains and have a long enough growing season before the first frost of the next autumn. But if the mud prevents you from plowing your fields, you can miss that window entirely. A week or two of delay because of mud could mean the difference between a successful harvest and a complete crop failure, which would in turn mean you wouldn't have enough food to survive the next winter. The mud wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an existential threat to the entire farming cycle. The historical debate here is about technology and adaptation. When did this problem begin to be solved? The answer lies in the development of better drainage techniques, like tiling, and the improvement of roads. But these were slow, expensive, community-level infrastructure projects that were far in the future for a first-year homesteader. A lesser-known innovation was the mud scraper. A simple long-handled tool with a blade that people would keep by their door to scrape the pounds of accumulated mud off their boots before daring to enter the house. The presence of these scrapers is a common finding in archaeological digs of swordhouse sites. A small testament to this universal, miserable experience. You are in a state of suspended animation. The air is warm. The birds are singing. The promise of spring is everywhere. But you are stuck. You watch the sky, not for snow, but for sun and wind, praying for them to dry out the land. The frustration is immense. After months of forced inactivity, you are desperate to work, to build, to plant. You want to feel the handles of the plow in your hands, to see the black earth turning over, to create rows of orderly, hopeful life. But you can't. You can only wait. The mud is a final humiliation. It's a reminder that the prairie operates on its own schedule, and it does not care about your plans or your deadlines. It is the final purge of winter, a messy, ugly, and necessary transition. You stand at the door of your sod die, looking out at the endless brown quagmire, the same way you stood at the window looking out at the endless white. The landscape has changed its color, but its message is the same: you are not in charge here. You are a supplicant, waiting for the land's permission to begin your life. One morning, the miracle happens. A week of sun and a steady, drying wind has done its work. The sea of mud has receded, leaving behind firm, workable earth. The roads are passable, for the first time in what feels like a year. You can leave your 160-acre island. It's time to go to town. The decision is born of necessity. You are out of everything. Flour, salt, sugar, kerosene. You need to buy seeds for spring planting. You need to pick up mail that has been accumulating for months. You're only linked to the outside world. And more than anything, you need to see other people. You hitch your thin but willing horse to the wagon. The journey is slow. The road a bumpy, rutted track, but you don't care. Every sight is a revelation. The vibrant green of the new prairie grass, a color so intense it almost hurts your eyes. The flocks of birds that have returned, the small wildflowers dotting the landscape. The world is bursting with life, and you feel your own spirit expanding with it. After a few hours, you see it on the horizon. The town, a small, haphazard collection of crude wooden buildings on an otherwise empty plain. It's not much a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, a land office, but to you, it looks like a bustling metropolis. As you get closer, you see other wagons, other people, all heading in the same direction. A small, temporary community is converging, everyone drawn out of their winter tombs by the same needs. You pull your wagon up to the general store and step down onto the wooden boardwalk. And then it hits you. The noise. The overwhelming, chaotic, beautiful noise of other human beings. People are talking, laughing, shouting greetings. The blacksmith's hammer rings against an anvil. A piano plays a tinny, cheerful tune from inside the saloon. After the profound silence of your winter, broken only by the wind, this cacophony is a physical shock. It's jarring, confusing, and absolutely wonderful. You step inside the general store, and the sensory overload continues. The smells of coffee, leather goods, tobacco, and bolts of new cloth fill the air. The shelves are stacked high with goods, a dizzying array of products you'd forgotten existed. You stare at the barrels of pickles and crackers, the tins of candy, the tools with clean, sharp edges. It's a museum of a life you used to know. And then you see the faces, so many faces, strangers. You have spent months with only the intensely familiar faces of your own family. No, you are surrounded by people you have never seen before. Their expressions, their movements, their very presence feels alien and overwhelming. You find yourself feeling shy, awkward, almost feral. You've forgotten how to interact with people. The storekeeper, a man with a booming voice and a friendly demeanor, greets you. You open your mouth to respond, and your voice comes out as a weak, rusty croak. You haven't had a conversation with a stranger in 6 months. You hand him your list, your hands trembling slightly. As he gathers your goods, other people talk to you. They ask where you settled, how you weathered the winter. You trade stories, a laconic but deeply understood exchange between survivors. You learn the names of the families who didn't make it, confirming the grim news you heard from the man on horseback. You see that all the winter has taken on everyone. They are all as thin and weathered as you are. Their eyes hold the same haunted, distant look. You are all members of the same, exclusive club. This experience of re-entry into society is a fascinating aspect of the pioneer experience that historians of emotion and psychology have studied. How did extreme isolation affect social skills and behavior? Diaries often describe a feeling of intense social anxiety and awkwardness during the first trip to town after winter. Settlers felt out of place, clumsy, and overwhelmed. There's an ongoing discussion about whether this experience contributed to the stereotypical image of the strong, silent, and stoic frontiersman. Perhaps this silence wasn't a sign of toughness, but a symptom of social atrophy, a learned habit from months of having no one to talk to. A lesser-known aspect of this first trip to town was the credit crisis. Many homesteaders had exhausted their cash reserves over the winter. They arrived in town with no money, relying on the storekeeper to extend them credit against their future harvest. The storekeeper became one of the most powerful figures in the community, acting as a de facto banker. His decision to grant or deny credit could determine the fate of a family. This created a complex relationship of dependency and, sometimes, resentment. You finish your business, your wagon now loaded with precious supplies. You have spent money you don't really have, a gamble on the future. Before you leave, you stop at the land office, which doubles as the post office. The clerk hands you a small stack of letters. They are from your family back east, their paper soft and worn from travel. You hold them in your hand, a physical link to your old life. As you begin the journey home, you feel a strange mix of emotions. You are relieved to have the supplies, but you are also eager to return to the quiet of your own land. The noise and chaos of the town were too much. You have been changed by the winter. Part of you has become as wild and solitary as the prairie itself. You look out at the vast, empty landscape, and for the first time, it doesn't feel lonely. It feels like home. You arrive back at your homestead as the sun is setting. The journey from town, which felt like an escape just hours ago, now feels like a return. You unload the precious sacks of flour and seed, the small luxuries like coffee and salt. You put them away in your sod die, which now feels less like a prison and more like a den, a safe, familiar space in the vastness of the world. The next morning, you wake up with a new sense of purpose. The waiting is over. The surviving is done. It is time to build. You take the new plowshare you bought in town and fit it to your plow. You hitch up your horse, who seems to understand the shift in mood, and you walk out to the field you broke last fall. You take a deep breath of the cool spring air, and you begin. The plow bites into the rich, black earth. This soil, now free of frost and mud, turns over in a long, perfect, dark ribbon. The smell is intoxicating, the smell of life, of potential, of a future. You work all day, your body, weakened by the long winter, screaming in protest, but it's a good pain. It's the pain of creation, of effort, of hope. You are no longer a victim of the landscape, you are its partner. You are writing your story upon it, one furrow at a time. As the days turn into weeks, the prairie undergoes a magical transformation. The pale green of early spring deepens into a lush, vibrant, almost impossibly rich emerald. The grass grows so fast you can almost see it. The sky, which was a flat, oppressive grey for so long, is now a brilliant blue, dotted with huge, puffy white clouds that drift lazily across the horizon. The world is awash in colour and life. Wildflowers explode across the landscape, purple, yellow, and red, a stark contrast to the monochrome world you inhabited for so long. You and your family work from sunrise to sunset. You plant your crops: corn, wheat, potatoes in the newly ploughed fields. You repair the animal shelter. You build a new, sturdier fence. Your hands, which were softened and raw, become hardened, callous. Your skin, pale from months indoors, darkens under the sun. You are becoming part of this place. But something inside you has been permanently changed. You can never look at this beautiful landscape in the same way again. When you look at the vibrant green grass, you can still see the ghost of the 20-foot snowdrift that was once there. When you feel the warm, gentle spring breeze on your face, you can still hear the echo of the winter wind's murderous howl. When you look at the beautiful, puffy clouds, you can't help but wonder what kind of storm they might become. The beauty of the prairie is no longer innocent to you. You have seen its other face, its white, deadly mask. You know that beneath this soft, green beauty lies a terrible power and an absolute indifference to your existence. This duality is the central, haunting truth of the pioneer experience. It's a theme that runs through all the great literature and art of the American West. The landscape is both a source of life and a source of death, a place of incredible beauty and incredible brutality. It offers the promise of freedom and a new beginning, but it demands a terrible price in hardship and loss. Historians call this the paradox of the garden, the idea that the American Eden was also a wilderness that had to be conquered, and that the act of conquest changed both the land and the people who settled it. The debate continues: did the settlers tame the West, or did the West tame them, stripping them of their illusions and forging them into something harder, more resilient, and perhaps a little more broken? You have become a different person. You are quieter, more watchful. You have a new appreciation for the simple things: a warm meal, a dry bed, the sound of a bird singing. You have learned the true meaning of resilience, not as a heroic virtue, but as the simple, stubborn act of putting one foot in front of the other, day after day. You have been tested down to the very core of your being, and you have not broken. One evening, you stand outside your sod die and watch the sun set over your newly planted fields. A gentle breeze rustles the new leaves on the cottonwood tree by the creek. Your children are playing nearby, their laughter a sound that you once thought you might never hear again. You look at the vast, beautiful, and terrible land that is now your home. You are not the same person who arrived here last fall. full of naive dreams and armed with a railroad pamphlet. You are a survivor, and as the last sliver of the sun disappears below the horizon, you know, with a certainty that is as deep and solid as the earth beneath your feet, that you will be ready when the winter comes again. The sharp edges of the day begin to soften. The memory of the plow, the scent of the soil, the vibrant, almost aggressive green of the prairie, it all starts to fade, blending into a gentle, quieter tapestry. The story is over, but the feeling remains. A deep, resonant hum like the sound of the wind over an endless field. You can feel the weight of the past year lifting, the tension in your shoulders finally releasing as you drift in the warm, calm air of a long-awaited spring evening. The world around you now is peaceful. The ghosts of the blizzard and the gnawing hunger have retreated, replaced by the soft chorus of crickets in the distant, gentle mowing of your cow. You are no longer in the dark, cramped so dully, but floating above it, looking down on the small, square patch of earth that held so much fear and so much courage. You see the faint light in its window, a tiny spark of human life holding its own against the immense, dark velvet of the plains at night. You are drifting now, carried on a current of peace. Away from that small patch of conquered ground, the story sinks down into the earth, becoming part of the soil, part of the memory of the land itself. You are light. You are warm. You are safe. The struggles of the past are just that past, and the future is a field of grain, waiting for the sun. Let the gentle rhythm of that thought carry you now, deeper and deeper, into a quiet, restorative sleep. The end of the article. Good night.